One of the things I think the U.S. military that hopefully sets us apart is that we do operate with a code of moral ethics, that we still need to, we need to do what's right. We can't stoop to the enemy's level. If we do, then we're really not, upholding the values that we profess to be fighting for in the first place. So it's tough, tough situation.
John, welcome to the Order of Man podcast. Good to see you today.
Thanks, Ryan. Happy to be here.
Yeah, I was actually really intrigued. I don't think we had connected before, but your team reached out to me and I was really intrigued, frankly, with the title of the book, Tough, Rugged Bastards. And then also I saw a quote about not only being tough, rugged bastards, but having strong backs and hard feet. I'm like, man, if there's somebody that needs to be on this podcast, it's a person who speaks with that kind of verbiage.
Yeah, that was spoken to me by our boss, but it was a kind of a mantra that I took on after that. That's really what sets a man apart. Somebody that can be counted on to be a tough, rugged bastard when necessary. But and a large part of that is less, I think, that having strong back and hard feet, and the willingness to earn the strong back and hard feet.
Yeah. I think everybody probably has a pretty good understanding of what you mean or what your command meant by strong back. But what do you mean by hard feet? What is that? What does that mean?
Gotcha. Most of what force reconnaissance does is long range reconnaissance behind enemy lines, or at least pre 9/11. It turned into a lot of the special operations, knock down doors and grab bad guys out of bed. But, the ability to move for long times over rugged terrain on your feet, was really the mark. So we did a lot of rucking. And, I'm still in my, now in my 50s, I think that's one of the best ways for, to gain and maintain overall, strength and durability is rucking. But that was something we did a lot of by nature of the job.
Yeah, so how did that change? You said pre 9/11, and obviously I think a lot of what your work and even your current work today, it was a pivotal moment during 9/11. So what changed specifically for the way that Marine recons approach their line of work?
Well, I think there's always two missions that Force Recon participated in. Behind enemy lines, usually foot patrolling, gathering information, which meant infiltration by parachute or by subsurface infiltration, and then kind of moving to remain unseen and gather information. And then the other side of that was direct action. So, showing up at bad guy's house, blowing the door off, and coming in and grabbing them. After 9/11, it seemed there was a lot more of the latter across the special operations community. There was still some reconnaissance and behind enemy lines, foot movement. It became, operating in the Middle East more challenging, obviously. Afghanistan was a great example. It was just really, really hard to operate in an area for an extended duration without being compromised. As we saw numerous occasions, and the SEALs, found out, and numerous, special operations units found. It's, in a close-knit tribal area, where people know, have lived for centuries. They know every rock. They know, which way the wind blows. So your ability to get in close is limited in duration. So there was a lot of those missions, and the advent of much better UAS, took a lot of that role, loitering UAS, the ability for aerial surveillance to answer some of those questions. There will always be a necessity for guys on the ground to get eyes on objectives and do things, but it certainly became more challenging, and we found that the role across special operations turned more to direct action.
So a UAS, is that, I'm assuming that's, what is it, unmanned aerial surveillance? Is that?
Yeah, UAV, unmanned aerial vehicles. Yeah, just...
Got it.
So those could, loiter over an area for extended periods and report on what was happening. And that, like I said, didn't eliminate the need for people with eyes on the target, but it certainly reduced the requirement for that.
Yeah, I mean, and that makes sense. I think it probably keeps our warriors a little bit safer, unless they're now doing a new mission, which might even be more dangerous, which is kicking in doors and these combat type roles as opposed to reconnaissance or surveillance and intel missions.
Yeah.
I think one of the things you mentioned is with SEALs. I think the one that comes to mind for everybody would be probably the lone survivor Marcus Luttrell story. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, and that was a perfect example of, and that happened, multiple times. That was obviously kind of the most famous, but and it was really when I first got into reconnaissance. We did a very challenging physical selection, but at the end of it, there was they ask you questions, and the question that they ended with was, you're leading a team, you're in the middle of the desert, and a shepherd walks up on you. What do? You kill him and continue the mission. Do you, tie him up and try to take him with you? Do you let him go? And that's always a challenging moral and ethical question. What do you do? And in this case, that's exactly what happened, to those guys. And the decision and it's it's not an easy decision to decide to just kill a guy who's trying to, make a living, raise his sheep and feed his family. So I don't fault them for that decision, but it's obviously one that in that situation had, pretty significant consequences.
Yeah. I mean, we tend to, as civilians, look at it and make light of a scenario like that. It's easy to say, oh, you should have just killed the guy, but that's a human being. That's an individual, like you said, trying to make a living. He's not involved in any of these nefarious actions necessarily, but also, from the outside. And I think obviously, I think you would agree. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it's got to be mission first. And unfortunately, there is some civilian collateral damage when it comes to war and combat.
Yeah, there is. That's that's a tough one, and that's why they asked that question. And there was not really a right answer or wrong answer, but they wanted to see how your thought process, how you made decisions. And
what would you say to that, John? Yeah.
Well, what I did say to that, and apparently it was good enough of an answer, was, I don't know. I don't have enough information. I'd have to, how critical was the mission? How likely was he to be able to get back and notify? Because you have to assume that, if somebody gets back, they're going to tell the story. Hey,
of course,
I just got,
of course,
a bunch of foreigners just snatched me up. How readily would we be able to get out of the area? There's just, there were so many things that are unknown in that situation. And in the situation they were in, their ability to get away quickly was obviously not, to get extracted wasn't, obviously didn't enable them to make that decision and get out of the area. So it's, not critiquing, the decisions made on the ground, because that's always a bad idea.
No, you weren't there. You don't know. Yeah.
It's just always a very challenging endeavor, all right, to weigh, because, one of the things I think the U.S. military that hopefully sets us apart is that we do operate with a code of moral ethics, that we still need to do what's right. We can't stoop to the enemy's level. If we do, then we're really not, upholding the values that we profess to be fighting for in the first place. So it's tough, tough situation.
It is tough because there's rules of engagement. There's standard operating procedures that quite literally hamper our ability to be an effective fighting force. I was in the military too, and some of the rules of engagement that we were to adhere to limited our ability to neutralize very real and serious threats to our own troops. And I was in Iraq in 2005 and 2006, and it was very frustrating to watch that we had to fight with one hand tied behind our back when we could have unleashed the full the might of the United States military. We just weren't able to because of what you're talking about right now.
Yeah. And there's definitely, a lot of times they go too far. Rules of engagement and restrictions that, made by people who are, well away from anything like combat. I do think that, and I've thought a lot about this over time, that, the law of war, the things that we're supposed to uphold, are partially there to make sure that we return, our fighting men and women return with honor, having fought honorably and are not. One of the big things I think we're seeing now with some veterans is it's I don't know how long the term's been around, but moral injury. They did things in combat that now they're having to pay the price for, and that's
mentally and emotionally. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. I mean, when you so a lot of what the law of war is intended to do is to make sure that hey, you're going to go out and kill people, but it's do it in a way that's consistent with what we believe as Americans, and if you do that, we're following the rules, then, later on, we're not going to be bothered by, or bothered less, at least, by the idea that you did something wrong, right? That you killed somebody that wasn't supposed to be killed or didn't need to be killed. So I think I think there are, there's obviously a huge uptick in, veteran suicides and veteran, PTSD and coping issues. A lot of things that maybe didn't exist to a greatest extent, in other wars, or certainly weren't as talked about in other wars. But, it certainly seems, I think there's a lot of contributing factors. But, one of the things I always tried to instill as a leader in my guys was, we'll fight hard as fuck, right? No, we're not pulling any punches, but we're not going to break rules and break the law to do it, because I don't want somebody that worked for me 10 years from now realizing that hey, I can't live with whatever it was that I did, or if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, of course. You said that maybe it's more prevalent than it has been in past conflict and combat. But you also said maybe it's just more reported. I think that's probably more the answer, is that we're just more aware of it now and more willing to talk about PTSD, for example, and some of these moral dilemmas and moral injury, which I hadn't heard that term before you said it. I don't think it wasn't there before. I think it just wasn't appropriate maybe in the time to talk about it. We're different than we were, 50, 60, 70 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, in World War I, like the disease or whatever was shell shock, right? You got, but that was really more of just an ability to deal with the relentless shelling, right? And most of those people were, if they were taken away from combat, like far away, they would never quite fully recover, and they would have like nervous issues. One of the interesting studies was those that were pulled just far enough back off the front line to kind of recover a little bit, were able to go back and were better off in the long run, right? Because they didn't feel like they were a coward, right? They weren't, they weren't leaving the fight. In Vietnam, the terms of PTSD, that's kind of when that first started really appearing. The idea that, people were living with something after the fact. So I definitely think it's a product of the times. I think we're potentially more susceptible to it now for probably a myriad of reasons. The suicide thing has gotten out of control. I mean, veterans from other wars weren't killing themselves at the same rate. There's probably, I'm certainly not the guy to understand that, but, I think some of it was, nobody else has been in a war for 20 years. I mean, 20 years is a long time for a nation to be at war. That's certainly a part of it.
It's interesting to me, though, because I don't want to discount any of the combat or the horrors that our veterans have seen. But I think our wars, just from a factual perspective, if you look at the data, are less bloody, less catastrophic than they historically have been. I'm wondering why we're committing suicide at rates that we weren't committing after World War I or World War II or some of these other engagements like we are modern wars. Do you think it's just the fact that it's been going on for 20 years, or is there something else at play? Maybe some societal factors.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's some societal factors. I mean, for like World War II, it wasn't nearly as long, but you joined for the duration. World War I was that way. You were, in the Pacific as a Marine in the Pacific, or a soldier in Europe. You were in, battle after battle after battle. So,
yeah,
I think certainly the amount of combat, the amount of casualties, the inability to save casualties. I mean, we had it, good, all things considered. When you were able to be in a level 1 trauma center, within an hour, right? That was kind of the standard in Iraq and Afghanistan. You could have top surgeons working on you, within an hour, the golden hour, they called it. And they could save almost everybody. You might lose a limb or whatever, but, World War II, that wasn't the case. Even Vietnam wasn't the case. So I think a lot of it societal. I think kind of had to do with, World War II was recognized that kind of the fate of the world is at stake. I think, Vietnam was obviously less of a popular war, and there was less understanding of why we were fighting it. And as it went on, there was obviously a lot of, probably the sentiment among some soldiers that were fighting it that, hey, we're dying for nothing. What are we even doing here? I certainly think the GWAT started, with a really solid purpose, right? Kind of retribution for the World Trade Center attacks, and then over time, people kind of had to start questioning, why is this continuing to go on? What are we doing? And one of the absolutely a lesson that should have been learned from Vietnam was that, if you don't have the people will support a war if it has a purpose, an end point, an end state. Our job is to do this, right? World War II.
Yeah. What does winning a war actually mean, right?
What's the strategic aim of it, right? Then World War II, we're going to stop the Nazis. We're going to stop Japan, right? That was, once we had done that, it became pretty clear, right? They said, hey, all right, we'll surrender. We're not fighting anymore. It's a war on terror is, kind of by definition, it's really never going to end.
Ongoing,
because
of course,
every day it goes on, you're creating more, insurgents. All right. Sometimes I would think that we'd go into a house, grab a really big shithead bomb maker out of his bed. But, his kid's sitting there looking on like, yeah, well, we probably made 2 more terrorists today, taking this one off the playing field. So it's tough. I mean, it's a big, hard problem, right? It's, and not to, I think it was absolutely a worthwhile cause, and the Marine sailor soldiers, airmen that fought, for 20 years, over that time did, a phenomenal job against, almost unbeatable odds. But you gotta, I certainly think that there are some people, and that's leading to people having, kind of post-traumatic, issues.
I'd never actually considered that. That is an interesting perspective, is that, maybe the more purpose driven, the more that a soldier or warrior can connect their assignment and their mission to something that's, morally sustainable or morally righteous, that maybe they're able to cope better with the decisions they've had to make. I do take a little bit of issue, and this is something I've had to work through just as a veteran myself with, what was it a worthy cause? And sometimes when I say things like that, people get mad at me because they think that I'm also knocking veterans who, to your point, and I agree, did a wonderful job with the mission, with the assignment, and with the assets they had at their disposal. I think those are two separate things. And so I question, like, was it, and they should be, like, was that a righteous thing? And also, yes, our warriors did a phenomenal job with what they were assigned to do.
Yeah. And I think you know, if veterans won't make that statement, then it makes it hard for anybody else, you know, civilian, to make that statement. And you know, one of the things that just frustrates me to no end is particularly veterans who, our job was to fight for the people's freedom, right? The Americans' freedom to do what the fuck they want, largely, and as long as it's not hurting anybody else. And that freedom should absolutely include the freedom to say, hey, man, this war was stupid, right? Why are we doing this? Why are we wasting blood and treasure on something without a clear end state? So I think, you know, veterans, we've got to, certainly have the obligation to, you know, speak our mind on things like that. And absolutely, you know, one of the reasons that we were there, allegedly, was to make sure that our fellow citizens, you know, regardless of what they were doing, you know, the milk still had to get delivered, you know, children still had to get taught, you know, toilets had to get plumbed while we were fighting. So, you know, I certainly don't fault anybody who is, you know, doing the job of keeping America running while we were, you know, off fighting. And I mean, I enjoyed myself most of the time. You know, I had there's one of the things that some people look at you weird when you say, but there's a lot about combat that's fun. You know, it's the ability to test yourself kind of on the ultimate stage that you know, it can be addictive. Right. I mean, I think for a lot of people, it became addictive.
So what was your role prior to 9/11? Because it sounds like post 9/11, you were handpicked and hand selected for some different duties and responsibilities in creating a team that would address some of these modern conflicts that we were getting ourselves involved with. What did that look like in that transition? What were you doing before, and then what were you tasked with doing after the fact?
Right. So I had been by 9/11, I'd been in the Marine Corps for about 14 years. So I'd, you know, been around, had missed out on the Gulf War, Somalia. You know, I hadn't been involved in that. So really hadn't experienced combat. I had been in force reconnaissance for, at that point, probably close to 10 years, most of my career. And that's, you know, kind of the pinnacle of at the time what there was to do in the Marine Corps, in my eyes, anyway. As an infantryman.
Is that different than a raider, a Marine raider? Is that something different?
It is. So the raiders didn't exist yet. So it's
got it. Okay.
So in 1987, the SOCOM was formed, the U.S. Special Operations Command, and it was an output or an outcome from the failed attempt to rescue hostages in Iran. So we had hostages in Iran. You know, we launched an operation to get them out. A bunch of special operations troops died not through contact, but through like poor planning and communication. So the decision was made that we're going to make a unit that will kind of house all of the special operations forces. So in 1987, that unit stood up, and the SEALs, you know, were kind of given over by the Navy, the Green Berets and the Rangers by the Army, the pararescue and combat controllers from the Air Force. And the Marine Corps was invited, hey, you know, give us your force recon guys. And the Marine Corps said, no, thanks. Which was always, the Marine Corps is...
Sounds about par for the course.
Yeah, I love the Marine Corps, but the Marine Corps has always had a reluctance to identify anybody as special, all right? So, and before this, you know, Vietnam, the SEALs, the Green Berets, and Force Recon were, you know, pretty much kind of considered, you know, equal partners, right? So it wasn't until 2001 that the recognition the Secretary of Defense was that this war is going to require a lot bigger special operations footprint. So he directed the SEALs to make more SEAL teams, the Army to make more Green Berets, and told the Marine Corps, hey, this time you guys are going to participate. So I was actually sitting in a Irish pub in Darwin, Australia, drinking a beer, and, the soccer game that was on the television screen switched to the first tower. And we were on deployment. Right? We had just left on ships, sailed from the States to Australia, stopped to train for a couple of days with the Australians. And so we knew we were jumping right back on ships and going straight across the ocean. So we were in Afghanistan in November of 2001. And
okay. So you were there just a matter of months, you were already in Afghanistan.
Yeah. And there were the horse soldiers, the Army Green Berets up in the mountains were, they were already there. But other than that, we were really the first boots on the ground in any number. So so we were kind of unaware of it at the time, but back home, the Secretary of Defense had told the Marine Corps, hey, you're going to do this. And the Marine Corps fought back as much as it could. And eventually, and it took 2 years before the decision was officially slapped, the table was slapped that we're going to create a 2-year proof of concept unit, a small unit of 86 men that will deploy, under U.S. SOCOM, and then we'll evaluate how well they do and decide whether it makes sense to have a larger component that became the Marine Raiders. So
got it.
So your
86 guys were the first iteration of Marine Raiders, it sounds like.
Yes, yeah.
Got it.
So when we started, we had these guys from World War II Raiders, because the Marine Corps had started the Raiders in World War II. They existed for 2 years, and then they disbanded them. So we had these guys who were in their 80s who were coming out and they're like, hey man, we want you to carry on our legacy, and they really are the ones that pushed ultimately for the name Marine Raiders to be awarded to Marine Special Operations. Which is really cool. I mean, that was awesome to talk to them and listen to their stories. But so in 2003, I was pulled in by my boss, and he was like, "Hey, have you heard the rumors about this unit?" And I was like, "Yeah, I've heard it, but I don't know anything about it." He's like, "Well, I'm in charge of it. So do you want in?" And I'm like, "Yeah, of course I do." All right. So he was like, "He'll be one of 4 team leaders, and you can pick your guys from across, Marine Recon." So it was, and we mostly picked guys that we knew. So it's, hey, here's,
sure, of course.
These guys are long ball hitters that I know. I want them on my team. And so we stood up, trained and prepared and thought that we were going to be going to Afghanistan. For about the first half of our training cycle, we had a year. We thought that we were going to go to Afghanistan, focusing on long-range reconnaissance, which was, like I said, it was a problem. About halfway through, we were told, no, you're going to go to Iraq and you'll work underneath a Navy SEAL task group. And so our role was going to be more of door kicking than anything else. So that's what we did. In early 2004, we went to Iraq, and we're kind of operating in around Baghdad area, and we're there through the year.
Yeah, that's why I was in Ramadi in 2005 through 2006. Wow. So a little, not too long after you were there. What was that experience like for you? When I was there, we had our unit. I was in the National Guard, but we got activated under regular Army, and we had 3 missions. We had a base defense mission for our base there in Ramadi. We had a small counterfire mission, but again, some of our rules of engagement limitations prohibited us from doing the work that we were capable of doing. And then we had a patrol mission, which is the kicking doors, that sort of thing. But what was your role while you were there? What were the types of things that you were doing? It sounds like you were door to door, in the towns, in the cities, like getting it done.
Yeah, we were, it was interesting. got in country, and there had not been normally, there's another unit that you turn over with, right? You show up and they call it a RIPTOA, relief in place and turnover of authority. Yeah. And in special operations, they were like, hey, here's all the targets that we were tracking, that we haven't had the opportunity to get to. That we didn't have anybody. So we showed up, and in our turnover was with Jocko. So Jocko was, I had deployed with him a couple times before, in years before. So we knew him a little bit, and he was working on the staff. So this was before he showed back up in Ramadi. With his task unit. He was like
task unit Bruiser, I believe. Yeah.
Bruiser, yeah. So he was on the staff. So he was just like our liaison that was like, hey, we have 2 targets that they were high value targets that everybody had been trying to get after, but had been unable to. So they like, really, this is all the info we have. You've kind of got to figure things out on your own. And so it really came down to just a lot of work by our, I said we started with 87. I think we actually deployed with about 100 people. About 30 of it were the shooters, the door kickers. We had about another 30 were our intel folks. And we had, which was unusual for a unit of that size. We had just amazing.
To have that much intel, or what was unusual?
Yeah, to have that big of an intel section.
Got it.
And that talented, right? So the Marine Corps we were pulling people from the NSA, from all these different places. So like human intelligence, signals intelligence, geospatial intelligence. We had people that were phenomenal. So they just started like digging into things and finding, gathering information and making assessments and, handing us missions. So, and then so we were kind of chartered with targeting relatively high value targets. So we weren't like kind of the door to door thing. We were 2 a.m. We show up at a particular house, blow the door off, grab a guy. We hopefully know who we're looking for. We're in and out in 30 minutes or less. With all of the computers and paperwork and things like that. So once we started figuring out who is who in the zoo, then we were able to, identify other targets and target, bomb makers specifically, or financiers and cell leaders and things of that nature. So a lot of or at least some of the guys from the deck of cards that was kind of the 52 most wanted, we got a couple of those guys. But that was a mission that everybody knew we were good at. So they were like, hey, this is supposed to be a test. So we also need to see you do some other things. So we spent a while as providing a bodyguard detail for the government, the Iraqi government. So we had primary responsibility for the vice president of Iraq, which was really cool. I mean, he was a Kurd, and both, everybody in Iraq hates the Kurds, except the Kurds. Saddam had killed millions of them. So there were a lot of people that weren't too excited about having a Kurdish vice president. So, protecting
I think
him
if I remember correctly, the Kurds were very skeptical of us being there because in the Gulf War, we had came in, basically stirred up the hornet's nest, left, and then allowed them to get massacred. And when we left in our absence, is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah. And they've, and I didn't know this, I don't think, until I got over there, but in pre-World War I mean, Kurds had their own country, right? And post-World War I, the Brits, it's called the Sykes-Picot Agreement. They decided they were going to draw new country borders, and they essentially eliminated Kurdistan. So the Kurds, are kind of unwanted, guests in Iraq, Iran, kind of what was their country is now. It didn't exist anymore.
It was is northern Iraq. Is that right?
Yeah, a lot of northern Iraq into Iran, across into Pakistan. I think in some cases they had a big kind of country that was theirs, and we kind of took it away, or not us, but the Brits.
It was taken away. Yeah.
Yeah. So they're kind of unwanted people in a bunch of countries. So they have. Been, they can be a great ally, but like, as we've done, a number of times through our country's history, is not treat people that support us really well. When they cease to become. We saw when we pulled out of Afghanistan the way that we did, or with the the Nungs and the Montagnards in Vietnam in some cases. So, at any rate, we protected him for a while. We provided sniper support to the fights in the Jaf and some different areas in Iraq. And overall, ultimately, at the end of the day, the decision was that we had performed well, and even though the Marine Corps was still didn't want it, and SOCOM really still didn't want it, the Secretary of Defense was like, "Hey, you guys are gonna, create an entire organization." So we went from being led by a colonel to a 2-star general, and went from 100 people to several thousand.
That's wild. What is your take? And I know you can't speak for the community; you can only speak for yourself. But what is your take on? Just a couple of days ago, there's a lot of reports of the Taliban parading and showing off our $7 billion worth of military helicopters and vehicles and equipment. What is your take on that?
Yeah, that's, it's unfortunate. Absolutely.
To put it mildly, right?
Yeah. I should have said before, my opinions, don't represent SOCOM, or I still work for them, or right. Anybody else. But, there's always going to be, whatever waste, in combat. In Vietnam, they were landing helicopters on ships and just pushing them over because there wasn't into the ocean, because there wasn't room to take them back. We always leave stuff, and all of that stuff that's left will probably last them, another year before they are unable to maintain them or get parts for them, hopefully. But, yeah, it was poorly executed. All right. The withdrawal was really poorly executed. And, we left behind a lot of, even more important than the equipment and things like that were, Afghanis who were fighting, with us, for us, interpreters that were working with us, a lot of people that got left, as, kind of in the quick pull out. And there were a lot of, I was kind of on the periphery of it, but I have a lot of friends who were very heavily involved in, was different operations, but one was called Operation Dunkirk, which was like a lot of former special operations guys who were just kind of working phones and finding ways to get their interpreter, or their Afghan commandos, back, out of the country, because they, had a huge target painted on their forehead, the minute that we started leaving. So that was poorly executed, to put it mildly.
You brought up an interesting point with their ability to even use this equipment for hopefully not much longer than a year, like you said. I almost wonder, obviously, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to be able to drive a Humvee down the road, but I also wonder, how are they flying our helicopters? Do they have, how does that work? There's so much, there's the military significance or how complex those machines are. It's hard for me to understand and wrap my head around that they're able to use these. And I'm sure they're not using them to their full capability, but the fact they can even fly the thing is kind of a interesting fact to me.
Yeah. And they're not, because they live in the desert doesn't make them dumb, obviously.
No, but, right. Of course.
And they've got, pilots and some people that we trained that depending on their whatever they're doing now, and it absolutely likely, the Hueys, or Blackhawks have been around for a long time. So there's parts and there's, people that they can hire, or bring in or train to maintain them. So, but I have a feeling that, a lot of them, it's really, really hard to maintain equipment in Afghanistan as it is. Depending on where you are, but that sand is like talcum powder, right? And it just gets in and destroys things
everything
really, really quickly. So there's hopefully, you know, I'm just kind of wishful thinking maybe, but between those couple of challenges, you know, hopefully most of that equipment won't live to be used against us, you know, at some point.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we'll keep our fingers crossed on that, but that's not a great strategy. But what is your role now? Because you're still part of the community. And if I understand correctly, you're responsible or a director for training for, is it for Marine recons? Raiders, is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. So after that unit, Det 1 was stood down in 2006 and MARSOC, the Raiders, was activated. I came out and I had spent most of my career in the Marine Corps on the West Coast in California, although I'm born and raised in Virginia. So I came out to North Carolina to where the headquarters was going to be and was tasked with helping to start the school. It was going to train Marine Raiders. I worked at that for a couple of years and then retired from active duty in 2008. And after it was 21 years, a little over, that I've been in. And was fortunate that I rolled right into a job, you know, the job that I have now. I've been doing for over 16 years, which is phenomenal to be able to get to work every day with, you know, young men and women that are, you know, on the either Marine Raiders or on the route to becoming Raiders.
Why have you're a civilian then at this point?
Yes.
Why have a civilian in your role as opposed to somebody actively in the military? I know once a Marine, always a Marine, but I'm just using those terms just so we can get an understanding of it.
Yeah, before I got into SOCOM, I had just was not used to seeing civilians in the military. You know, it was rare. It was much more prevalent in SOCOM, and I think it's become more prevalent. One of the downsides with the military is that, you know, every 2 years you're moving, you know, right? So there are areas, particularly, you know, one of the things that I really oversee, kind of three main areas: the courses that we teach and the curriculum development and management thereof. And that's a full-time. I mean, I've got a team that does that, but that's, you know, throwing somebody in it, expecting them to learn it and be able to do everything they're supposed to do, you know, and then, oh, by the way, you're leaving in 2 years is challenging. So there are places where having, you know, continuity is valuable, and there's, you know, having, you know, somebody who's seen it come around again and again, the good ideas. That, hey, what if we do this? Like, well, we could try it, but we tried it 4 years ago, and then we tried it 4 years before that. So that's valuable. And having, you know, somebody with a level of credibility and special operations experience that can, you know, not bound by the military rank structure. You know, I can talk to our commanding officer just, you know, kind of man to man about, you know, questions that he might have, or you know, offer advice to the senior leaders. So I think that's valuable. But the curriculum development, instructor development, which is a really, you know, my favorite part of my job, is, you know, we train and the guys coming in to be instructors are Raiders, right? They're just long ball hitters. They're really good at what they do. Top
notch people, anyways. Yeah.
Yeah. But, you know, teaching them how to teach, the coach and mentor and you know, is I love that part of it. And then probably the part that I might love even more than that is, you know, there's a lot of, you know, when we get new students in, I get to, you know, talk to them a lot about kind of what will make them successful. Some about like ethics and morality and, mental toughness, you know, a lot about that, which is one of my favorite things to talk about. You know, and then some things that, you know, study habits, goal setting, you know, things that'll make them successful as they go through a really hard training course. So it's pretty fun.
Yeah.
You know, I've got a pretty badass job.
Pretty intensive. Yeah, I'd say. Are you planning on sticking around for a while? I mean, you probably don't have any plans on leaving anytime soon.
I ask myself that. Like, I tell myself that when I stop enjoying, you know, going to work every day, and I probably enjoy it about 4 days out of 5. There's a lot of
that's pretty good. That's pretty good.
administrative, yeah, the administrative stuff that I have to deal with. But then, just when I start to get frustrated, and one of the things I love to do, I go, and I also have access to, our gym and strength and conditioning coaches, our dietitians and physical therapists, and which I need more and more of. But
as do we all.
Showing up in the gym, at 6 a.m. and there's 80 hard chargers in there, just throwing steel around, and as you kind of walk through and try to find an open rack, they're like, "Hey, Mr. Dailey, how's it going?" I like that kind of makes my day. So it starts the day off right.
Hearing Mr. Dailey was probably a trip when you became a civilian. That was probably a hard thing to wrap your head around.
I feel bad about it now. I mean, I don't. I really, I'm not the kind of guy that'll answer the phone, Mr. Dailey, or I feel very awkward. But and I used to stand in front of them, and be like, "Hey, my name's John," but they start calling me John, and then the instructors yell at them for doing that. So I'm like, all right, I guess it's I'm twice your age at least, so it's now time when I guess I have to come to terms with it. If not for my sake, for theirs, so they're not getting yelled at.
And I mean, there's just a level of decorum and respect with that as well, which I think all of us can appreciate too, especially in the military. I mean, that command and that respect, I think, is something that's valued. I wish we had more of it in society in general, so I don't think it's a bad thing.
Yeah, no, I don't. And I've always been, somebody to call, my elders, sir or Mister, but I just never really saw that applying to me. It's like everybody says, I thought Mr. Dailey's my dad.
Yeah, right. How much are you able to avoid the political gamesmanship that I know takes place at the higher echelons of military leadership, and obviously you're in civilian leadership within the military as well?
We luckily, where I work at the school and within the MARSOC, the Raiders as a whole, there's probably some of that. I mean, I have absolutely no aspirations of becoming a higher rank. My job is my job, so it will not, I basically get cost of living increases as I go, but I'm not getting promoted. So in order to get promoted and get a significant raise, I would have to seek out another job, and I have no desire to do that. So I'm kind of immune to it, which is also nice. I get and most of the people I work with are in the same boat. They're like, "Hey, I'm doing this because not necessarily, I have a military retirement, and not because I have to. I could absolutely get by, without it. I could, certainly there are some other things I would like, I'd like to be able to write more, and making a living writing books is a little more challenging than
hard
some
work.
people might think.
Yeah.
So that's will kind of remain a sideline, but there are absolutely other things I would like to do. But I just find it hard to step away from something where I get the absolute job satisfaction every day of having, being able to play a small role in making Raiders.
Yeah. No, I bet that's very rewarding. What are some of your biggest frustrations that you have in leading the way that you do? Maybe even in the political landscape that you might have to navigate to some degree, not you necessarily, but seeing how it's infused in the culture, or just training warriors. What are some frustrations that you deal with?
One of the things that I've been thinking about a lot more is, one of the things we've been looking at, we have a not insignificant chunk of people that start the training and then quit, and I hate to see that, somebody they're quitting after they've already gone through a pretty grueling assessment and selection process. So, 75% of the people that started trying out didn't make it. So of the 25%, we have people that have proven themselves capable.
Right.
So that's absolutely a frustration, especially talking with them after, knowing that man, you're going to have that in the head for the rest of your life, that you probably could have done this thing and you quit on yourself. So I spend a
Do you
lot of
think
time
that's a
up front.
cultural issue? I'm really curious about that because I mean the general consensus, I think, or at least what I've understand it to be, is the candidates that we have eligible for roles and positions like this are fewer and farther between than they may have been even 30 years ago. Do you feel that's the case, or is there something else at play here?
Yeah, I think so. Well, look, I mean, just if you talk about military recruiting, the numbers, and I'm not really up on them, but supposedly like less than 2% of American high schoolers are eligible to join because they're fat and out of shape and or have like criminal things or whatever the case is. Something that just disqualifies them. So we're drawing from a pool of 2% of the eligible population, and that's got to fill the Marine Corps, the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, Space Force, Coast Guard, National Guard, Reserve, all of these entities fighting for these guys. And the Marine Corps has always done pretty well at meeting recruiting goals, but I do think absolutely there's some cultural things that have changed. And one of them is there's a whole lot of like GWAT vets that spend a lot of time like motherfucking the military, bad mouthing or saying that, hey,
what is that? A GWAT? Did you say GWAT? What is that?
The global war on terror. Guys who were in the military.
Got it.
That are like, hey, I wouldn't want my kids serving in the military now, and are like kind of vocal about and there's, it's kind of a double-edged sword. The only way to fix something is to get in and fix it. All right, you can't if you sit on the sidelines criticizing it, you're probably not going to do much to fix it. But there are still, I'm amazed that there are still, incredibly talented, folks, that, spend some time in the Marine Corps, try out and come to us. And hands down, they're smarter, like a hell of a lot smarter than I was. When I joined, they have a lot going for them. I mean, obviously more technology, we didn't have a lot of technology, but,
Sure.
More tech savvy and things. But the one thing that I think is lacking is in some cases, and I don't want to like broad brush statement anybody, but like mental toughness is a thing that's not as prevalent, and has to be built. I mean, we work to kind of build that, commitment. There's like, it's become, I think, more fashionable to like, hey, if you're not enjoying what you're doing, just quit. Right. And
right.
in some cases there's hard, there's probably good, there's some, truth to that, but there has to be a recognition that if you want to achieve something great, you've got to go through the steps that it takes to get there. And, most of those steps are, if it's something worth having, it's likely that it's going to be a lot of hard work. And, I also think that I've absolutely noticed this. I think that we draw from a pool of Marines who were, the big fish in the little pond where they came from, right? They were the fittest, the smartest, the toughest, the coolest. And they show up and they realize that they're like kind of treading water, barely, trying to keep their head above water because they're in a room full of pipe hitters,
Right.
And it takes, it could take a little bit of time to realize that, man, imagine living life showing up every day in a group of guys like this. They're all badasses, where I've got to, like every day work to make sure that I'm worthy of being here. So I think there's a portion early in training where if they can't make that connection, that they're like, man, maybe it's better to go back to where I came from and be the cock of the walk,
The big
rather
fish
than
in that little pond. Yeah.
Yeah. Rather than sit here and fight. So a lot of, and some of it, I think, is another reason why it comes better from a father figure, right? Or a grandfather figure. I'm getting close to that point. And maybe not quite, but, I talked to him a lot really early on about, hey man, this is absolutely worth doing. All right. It's, but because it's worth doing, we got to have people that want to do this. And so we make it, it's easy to quit. I mean, and once you quit, there's no taking it back. That's something
Right.
that I think is pretty standard around special operations units. And the SEALs, they have the bell that they ring, and we have which a thing that we took from the World War II Raiders. When they show up, they're given a sling rope, right? Like a 15-foot section of rope that you would use to tie a rappel seat or use to, like help make a rope bridge to cross an obstacle or whatever the case may be. And they wear that kind of looped around their shoulders and tied into a knot, kind of like a pack strap, and they wear that throughout training, and all they have to do to quit is take it off and turn it in, because it's kind of the recognition that, hey, man, with your 15-foot section of rope, your team can get over bigger obstacles, right? And if you're not willing to do that, then, you're degrading your team's ability. And if that doesn't, make you think very, very long and hard about quitting, then, you're not somebody that we want on the team to begin with. But the question is,
There's also some shame that comes too, and I don't always think shame's a bad thing. I remember I did this this endurance event, and you could quit any time. And the way that you quit is you rang a bell that was in the shape of a Spartan helmet. And there were a couple moments where I'm like, what am I doing? I don't need to be doing this. But damn, if I was going to walk up in front of everybody else and ring that damn bell, I'm not doing that. No way.
Yeah.
And I think that little bit of peer pressure helps.
Yeah. And that's, I went out to BUDS, to the Navy SEAL school, and talked to them about the bell and everything. And that's, came back, realized that doing something, because before that, all somebody had to do was say, I quit. We were like, hey, let's make it something that they've got to do in front of their peers. And they've got to recognize that by quitting, they are, demonstrating that, hey, I'm giving up on you guys, or I'm not. And that reduced our, and we did that, I don't know, more than 10 years ago, but that absolutely cut down on that attrition.
I'm sure it makes
you stop and think about it, right? And so that's, and it's early. It's early in the training, and it's that people quit. Once you make it through the point that you've done hard things together and you've kind of bonded as a team, then it becomes much harder, for somebody to quit. But it's like I said, it's double-edged. We don't want somebody that's a quitter. If we can't have that on missions when the importance is at the level that it is. But I also really, really hate to see it. I mean, it hurts. I've had grown men coming to my office, in tears. Like, can I take it back? Is there something I can do? Can I come back? Can I prove? And like, man, you can't. I'm sorry. But that's. And I do think that there's absolutely some societal, changes that have made quitting more acceptable. Made changing your mind, giving up, more acceptable. That made mental toughness less of a priority. And particularly, as young people are growing up.
Yeah. Well, as we wind things up today, I am curious if you've seen, to the degree, of course, that you can talk about, seen any developments as far as where we might be headed for it in the direction of the future of war. And I know obviously you can't speak for everybody or just war in general, but I'm curious if there's things that you're seeing that we need to be aware of when it comes to how we fight our wars and our battles.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously technology has changed so much. Like I said, there'll never not be a requirement for men with strong backs and hard feet, but there will, I mentioned earlier the idea of the golden hour of being able to get somebody from being wounded to a trauma surgeon working on them. That there's recognition that if we get into what's called great power conflict, where China, Russia, a war with a country, rather than a war with a bunch of roving thugs, that that goes out the window. All right, so you're going to be back to casualties. I mean, a lot more people not being saved that would be able to be saved if in the global war on terror. It's interesting time figuring out how you equip boots on the ground with technology and maximize both of those things. It's started to become, or it's not even started, it's been kind of known for a while that there's a lot of our adversaries are much more adept in the cyber realm than more adept, but they've been at it for longer. So the simple thing that we're seeing in Ukraine of hey, I post an Instagram picture and suddenly a bomb is landing on me. The ability to use social media as a weapon is a really big thing. The ability to we've become conditioned that we've got to, and it's less of I think we do a better job in special operations of making people understand. But in the conventional army, the bigger army, or in units that are not full-time soldiers, hey, if you're used to posting on Instagram 20 times a day, it's not uncommon that, hey, let me take some pictures of these people. And if I've got, I'm sitting some, headquarters somewhere with facial recognition software, I can not only identify everybody in that picture, where they live, their families, and, start, there have been cases of, just sending threatening emails or information or erroneous information to families of people deployed. So it's, I mean, there's a certain mindfuck, capability that we are probably unwilling to totally embrace, that our adversaries are less, concerned with. Misinformation. There's, so much of that we're sucking in every day that are, Russian bots and Chinese bots, telling you things that are either absolutely untrue or at least, partially untrue, that are, and we're, as a nation, we're kind of ripe for that. We're willing to be spun up, depending on which side you're on, by anything that fits the stereotype of information that you're used to hearing or you want to hear. So yeah, I think, all of us would do a lot better to just kind of be more critical of everything, the information that we consume. One, consuming less of it is, I found is I'm a huge fan of study, right? But I've become so I read, voraciously. I read a lot on the internet, but news, I've largely learned that, hey, I'm going to pick and choose, what I listen to and listen broadly, don't, not getting tied into one, network or one, channel. Because I think many times we're our own worst enemies. We're, have been the greatest nation in the world for a long time. Right. And we certainly need to remain that way. And it's hard to do when we've got, one half of the country wanting to kill the other half.
That's true.
And vice versa.
Well, John, this has been a great discussion. I'd love to hear how the guys can connect with you so they know where to go. And then obviously the book is out right now, so where they can pick up a copy of the book.
Absolutely. So the one-stop shop is jadailey.com, Dailey. That's my website, obviously, but there's links to all of the places you can get the book, Tough Rugged Bastards. It's Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million. The physical store may not have it yet. You may have to ask for it, but you can order it online and get it. It's available in the e-reader version, hardback, paperback, and the audio book is coming. I think next month it'll be available. But also on there's 2 Substacks that I write, and there's links to those. One called Walking Point, that's just a weekly kind of things that I think about kind of getting better. And the other is called Ruck the Fuck Up, and that's largely mental toughness, and rucking is conditioning. And then there's below that this will be on there when it comes out, podcasts that I've been on and things of that nature. And down at the bottom's all the social media. I try to stay off of that as much as I can, but it's kind of a necessary evil. So LinkedIn, I'm relatively active on, and Instagram, I post a good bit. Other than that, it's pictures of my food or whatever, or my post workout pictures.
There you go. Well, good. Well, I appreciate your time. I'll sync everything up so the guys know where to go. And thank you for your service. You've got decades and decades of service to this country and to us. And it probably doesn't get told to you enough, but we are grateful. I appreciate you and your work and you taking some time to join me today.
Awesome. Well, I had a great time. Thank you for yours. And I had a blast. Thanks for having me on.